Great. So we are giving a presentation on the Basque conflict. And so just to start off, this is a map of the Basque region, as you can see, or Basque country. As you can see, most of it is in Spain, and then there's a portion that's in France. However, for this presentation, we're mainly going to focus on what's been happening on the Spaniard side. So just, I guess, brief geography lesson. The Pyrenees Mountains are probably the most major geographic feature of the Basque country. The Basque Autonomous Community in Spain is really divided into three provinces. The capital home of the Basque Parliament is Vitoria-Gasteiz. The Basque language itself, it's not an Indo-European language, it's actually just a language isolate. It's written with Latin alphabet. It is spoken by about 650,000 people in Spain and about 130,000 people in France. And most Basque speakers are bilingual in either Spanish or French. So now just to touch on brief history and roots of the conflict. The Basque people have managed to preserve their self-identifying characteristics throughout the centuries, and today they are a large part of the population which shares a collective consciousness and an expressed desire to be self-governed. This shared consciousness survives through the Basque people's own unique culture, language, and political past. Over the centuries, the Basque country has been able to maintain various levels of political self-governance under different Spanish political frameworks, such as absolute monarchies, the First and Second Spanish Republic, and the current parliamentary monarchy. Now, the disagreements, they have deep historical roots. Some historians trace the conflict or the disagreement all the way back to the 15th century. In the Basque provinces, there has traditionally been a tendency to defend a different social reality or identity, one that includes a different language, a different culture, and different customs. Numerous conflicts and wars have occurred prior to the 20th century because of annexing or centralizing rationale of kingdoms or states that wish to incorporate the Basque provinces into their territory and to exercise sovereignty over the Basque people. And now just to briefly touch on the main sections or the main parts of the Spanish Civil War, and I'll tie it all into this conflict. So just to fast forward a little bit, in April 1931, elections were held in Spain, which resulted in those favoring a republic, winning all the major cities in Spain. Those victorious at the election then declared Spain a republic, and the monarchy was then abolished. The new republic immediately faced a number of major issues, first of which is two regions within Spain, Catalunya and Basque. They wanted their independence. Second, unemployment in both agriculture and industry rose, and those in work had to had to deal with the cut in wages as the economy struggled to survive the Depression. Also, the historic privileges of the Roman Catholic Church were attacked. The priests were no longer paid by the state. They were actually had to receive their payment from the purse of the church. Also, many army officers were made to retire early. The huge estates in Spain, they're all nationalized, and the wages of those who worked in industry were increased, but they were to be paid by the owners of those industries, not by the government. So, in January of 1932, a number of army officers tried to overthrow the government, led by Manuel Azan, I believe that's how you pronounce it, who was then the prime minister. However, a new political party was formed called I believe it's pronounced CETA. This was a right-wing party that dedicated to protecting the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and the landlords. However, situations just got even worse in January of 1933 when 25 people were killed by the government troops who were attempting to catch some anarchists, or not some, but a few anarchists near the city of Cadiz. This lost the government a great deal of support among the working class, and the socialists withdrew their support from the government. Azana resigned as prime minister, and elections were held again in November of 1933. Now, this election, the right wing won a majority of support, and the largest party in the parliament became the CETA political group. Now, the new government, once they got into power, they immediately overturned all of the changes brought in by the Azana government. This forced many parties on the left to come together to form the Popular Front. They organized strikes, riots, and they took part in a variety of violent acts. So this really led Spain, or the situation in Spain, to get even worse. And just for one last time to try to prevent this, they held elections again in February 1936. And in this election, the Popular Front won, and Aznar once again became prime minister. However, the government of, oh, sorry. Yeah. However, the government of the Popular Front was considered a farce, and after the socialists withdrew their support from it, more and more public disturbances occurred, and the government had basically lost control of the entire country. In July 1936, a leading right-wing politician by the name of Sotelo was murdered, and the right-wing politicians and their supporters believed that they were now a serious danger. Thus, they decided to put their trust into a military dictatorship. However, unknown to them at the time, the military was already planning a coup to take over the country. And now we're going to talk about this guy, General Franco. So, kind of in the process of all this, he wasn't necessarily in Spain before the Civil War happened. He was actually banished to the remote post in the Canary Islands, which to me sounds pretty good, but he initially hesitated in his support of the military. But essentially he became fully committed. On July 18th, 1936, military officers launched a multi-pronged uprising that put them in control of most of the western half of the country. Franco's role at this time was to fly to Morocco and begin transporting troops to the mainland. He also made contacts with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, secured arms and other assistance that would essentially continue throughout the duration of what became known as the Spanish Civil War. Within a few months of Franco joining the military coup, he was named head of the rebel nationalist government and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He unified the base of support by securing the backing of the Catholic Church, as well as combining the fascist and monarchist political parties and dissolving all other political parties. So where do the Basque region, Basque people fit in all of this? Well, during the Spanish Civil War, they actually suffered a great deal, especially their culture. Franco and his fascist party wanted to rid Spain of all heterogeneity. Furthermore, Franco believed in one unified Spanish state, opposing regional diversity. The Basque people were the ones mainly targeted. Franco banned the speaking of Basque. Since 1977, Basque and other regional languages in Spain have had co-official status in their respective provinces along with Spanish. The Basque also lost all political autonomy and economic rights. Many Basques were imprisoned or killed. Franco also ordered a Basque town, I believe it's pronounced Guernica. Sorry, my Basque isn't good. So. Guernica to be bombed by the Germans in 1937, and this resulted in several hundred civilians being killed. So what we have essentially forming in 1955 was the formation of the ETA. The ETA originated as a faction of the Basque Nationalist Party, or BNP, and split over nonviolent policies. The BNP had always been mostly rigidly opposed to any form of violence, no matter what the justifications may be. However, the ETA strongly disagreed with that and thought violence was necessary to achieve their goals. In 1966, the ETA further divided into two significant groups based primarily on their goals and methods. The first group had very Marxist-Leninist ideals and favored sabotage and assassinations to gain complete independence. The other group considered themselves to have more national ideas, and though they approved of violence, they did not support it as much as the other group. In addition, they really just favored autonomy rather than complete total independence. And tensions essentially escalated even more in the 1970s and, oh, sorry.
Where are you?
It's your turn, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, tensions escalated between the Basque people and the government in the 1970s, and Sarah will take it from here.
Okay. Move this out of district. Oh, okay.
It's fine.
Okay.
All right, so I know that was a very complicated history. Thank you all for trying to follow it. This is pretty straightforward. The very fascist General Franco, who was in charge, had appointed a prime minister named Luis Carrero Blanco, but only after 6 months of serving, he was assassinated by an ETA car bomb. And this was really a big start to tensions between the two groups, the Spanish government and the ETA. But 2 years later, in '75, Franco died, and he did not name a successor to take over. So King Juan Carlos I took power, and he actually decided to try to ease tensions, that he would grant the Basque region more control over education and taxes, permission to elect its own parliament, and the ability to form its own police force, which would all be independent of the Spanish government. And this was hoped that by giving them a little, they would stop with the violence. Unfortunately, that was not enough for the ETA, so in 1980, they waged their bloodiest campaign. They put a bomb in a supermarket, and 21 shoppers were killed. The Spanish government retaliated against this, and between 1983 to about 1987, a Spanish-backed group, Spain argued that they had nothing to do with it, but it was a Spanish-backed group. It was a paramilitary, quote-unquote, counter-terrorist group called Grupos Antiterroristas de Liberación, or GAL. And they kidnapped, tortured, and killed 27 ETA members, or their suspected family members and associates, but unfortunately the majority of the people that they ended up kidnapping and torturing were just innocent Spanish civilians. So this did not help on either side. There were attempts at peace after back and forth. It got to be so much that in 1986, Gesto por la Paz, or basically the Association for Peace in the Basque Country, begins holding peaceful protests in response to either ETA attacks or GAL attacks. And what they would do is they would convene silent demonstrations peacefully in communities throughout the Basque Country the day after any violent killing. Again, didn't matter who had committed it, they were just tired of the violence, and so they would just sort of stand with their arms folded in the middle of a village or a town that had been hit and just stand there silently, basically in and just defiance of what was happening. And also, in addition to what they were doing, in January of 1988, all Basque political parties, except for one ETA party, came together to sign what was called the Ajuria-Enea Pact, which was hopefully to end the ETA's violence campaign, but within not too long after that, unfortunately, bombings and terror attacks began again, and so that pact became null and void. The Spanish government also began a practice of what was called reinsertion, and reinsertion was basically ETA members who had been imprisoned but whom the government believed had genuinely abandoned violence were going to be freed and allowed to re-enter society, and this did happen, and it helped a little bit, but it still wasn't enough to curb the violence. In fact, many of the released members were seen as traitors to their cause and then were killed by the ETA, so it didn't really help the violence at all. In 1995, the ETA, under new leadership, also offered something called the Democratic Alternative Peace Deal, but Spain rejected it, and the bombings continued. And the reason, unfortunately, that Spain rejected it is because the Democratic Alternative called for, quote, the cessation of all armed ETA activity if the Spanish government would recognize the Basque people as having sovereignty over Basque territory, the right to self-determination, and if it freed all ETA members in prison. But the Spanish government rejected this because they said it goes against the Spanish Constitution, and it wasn't even a debate. This was never going to happen. So, permanent ceasefire, question mark. In March 22nd of 2006, the ETA announced that there would be a permanent ceasefire, and they were very serious about this. They broadcast it all over Spanish media networks, and it looked like there might actually be hope for this conflict to finally come to an end. Spanish Prime Minister Zapatero immediately responded to this broadcast saying, if you want to talk peace, we will gladly also talk peace. We have been waiting for you to come around, and we are glad to see that you are finally ready. Unfortunately, just a few months later, in the same year, the ETA detonated a van bomb in Madrid airport, which toppled a massive building and killed 2 people inside of it. And so Zapatero responded by issuing a statement saying, nope, that's it, the peace process is over, we're done with you, we're not even going to talk to you. So, in between that time and 2011, several other attempts at peace, signed treaties, failed treaties, bombings occurred back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and finally it got to the point where it was so much that in October 2011, the ETA announced an official cessation of all violent activity and all armed resistance. And they announced this at a conference called the Donostia San Sebastian International Peace Conference, or in English, the International Conference to Promote the Resolution of Conflict in the Basque Country. Now, what's interesting about this, and also slightly unfortunate, is this really unbelievable irony. This document, which sounds great on the surface, it was signed by so many high-ranking international leaders, such as former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. It was signed by British diplomats. It was signed by international peacekeepers. And it was supported overwhelmingly by former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, former US President Nobel Peace Laureate Jimmy Carter, and many others who sang its praises. But this document, which was signed to create peace in the Basque Country, did not involve any figures from either Spain or France. They signed it without the consent of the two countries that it concerned the most. What good that does, I don't know. But it was hopeful. It was hopeful even though it was done without them. So, besides that obvious challenge to the ceasefire, there are other challenges as well that exist today. The current conservative Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, wants to totally dissolve the ETA, and he has openly called for such. And that is obviously causing tensions because the ETA does not want to be dissolved. They feel they have every right to exist. They have pledged to refrain from a violent separatist movement, but they have not pledged to refrain from a separatist movement. They want now more than ever, especially that they've called for peace, they want their own homeland, and they are still pushing for that as intensely as ever. However, thankfully, to this point, they're still pushing for it democratically, but of course, that could change at any time. And to tell you about the rest of it, Thomas is going to tell you what is going on today and what efforts are being made.
According to those involved in the peacemaking process in the Basque Country, the conflict has recently moved into a new phase. In February, ETA announced that they are willing to hand over the remaining weapon caches. This has been the most significant news since the 2011 ceasefire. Promoters of peace worldwide are hopeful at ETA's recent move. From Archbishop Tutu to Bill Clinton to Jerry Adams, it is getting a lot of attention, and events that have taken place over the last 3 months can be seen as a turning point in the Basque peace process. Lokari, a nonprofit organization in the Basque Country, is a hard worker of peace. They work hard to promote peace, dialogue, and reconciliation. They have come up with 4 major advances that can contribute to the peace process. The first one is to guarantee security. The second one is to bring prisoners closer to home. Number 3 is recognizing all victims of human rights violations. And number 4 is to create a new space for collaboration and dialogue. Challenges to peace. One challenge to peace is that this conflict is a protracted social conflict. Fulfilling all 4 Edward Azar's tenets of protracted social conflict, we can see that this one, like other deep-rooted conflicts, it's not easy to solve. This, of course, explains why it has been so difficult. An understanding of Azar's criteria for social conflict enables peace promoters an understanding of what needs to take place to ensure lasting peace. Peace has been elusive in the Basque Country because both the Spanish government and ETA thought they could eventually win through force, thus leaving the need for a peace settlement unnecessary. Because of the arrest of hundreds of its members and a lack of public support, ETA has finally realized that they no longer have the power to go on. Keep in mind that since the 2011 ceasefire, the Spanish government is more at fault for there not being a peace settlement. They have made little efforts towards solving the conflict and refuse to cede anything to ETA. And we all know that achieving peace takes concessions from both sides. One thing that I see would help move the peace talks forward is actually the elections of a new government. The current Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, and the previous Conservative Prime Minister, José Aznar, are both linked to the Franco regime. Conservative Party holds a position that the government should never negotiate with ETA. So how can there be peace when the government presents itself as a barrier? Since the conflict is in its final stages, I believe that the best move now would be for mediation. International mediators have been used for nearly 3 decades in this conflict. Each time, they've had moderate success, with the biggest success coming from the 2011 ceasefire that was mentioned earlier by Sarah. I think it is time again to bring the mediators back to the table. A final peace is close, and perhaps the involvement of some big-name individuals will help the Spanish government understand that they need to take this more seriously. In my opinion, educating children on the importance of peace will make them and their society more peaceful. Recently, while on Facebook, I came across an article that discussed how video games can be used to teach children empathy and social skills. 2 apps, one called Social Express and the other called Thomas Was Alone, were particularly fascinating. Through these animated games, players are making themselves more understanding of social norms while also learning the importance of teamwork. To me, the thought of changing one psychological outlook through games is exciting. So if they can make a video game that builds empathy, they could perhaps make one that can condition children to become more receptive of peace and reconciliation in areas of conflict. Of course, this is not applicable in all conflicts. However, in places like the Basque Country, they do have access to computers. And for those who do not have access to video games, books and interactive activities can be a substitute. This March, a movie called Ocho Apellidos Vascos, or 8 Basque Surnames, debuted in Spain with enthusiasm. In it, a Spanish man from the south is doing his best to disguise himself as a Basque to fool his Basque girlfriend's family. It has been controversial since it comically depicted separatist guerrillas and car bombs. The movie has been a surprising success in the Basque Country. And it is interesting because just a few years ago, a movie like this would have been unthinkable. To me, this shows that there is a shift in the Basque Country, especially since they can now manage to laugh at their own past. Movies, like the ones shown in Dr. Manolovich's Love and Forgiveness series, depict reconciliation through dialogue and understanding. However, I think there is room for comedic relief as well. A challenge that I can see for the Basque Country is the formation of splintering groups off of ETA. This is one reason why, when talks for final peace commence, there needs to be collaboration and representation by all parties involved. And of course, another challenge is the Spanish government. A positive first move would be for the government to finally admit the atrocities that took place and that were covered up during the Franco regime. This would also help allay distrust between the Basque and Spanish. Another important step, and one that would particularly make the Basque happy, would be to move the ETA political prisoners closer to their homes. The majority of Basque people do not want the struggle to continue. ETA and other left-wing nationalist groups no longer have the support of the average Basque citizen. With the newest concessions by ETA and the support of leaders worldwide, it is time for the Spanish government to take the next step in moving this conflict towards a positive peace.
Question.
Or dead silence.
Sure. I was wondering, what do you guys think that all of the large-scale independence demonstrations in Catalonia and, say, the upcoming referendum in Scotland and similar things, what kind of impact might they have on the Basque Country?
I think it could potentially set things back because they're bringing bring it back to attention that there's places in Spain that want to be autonomous.
Sasha, release it.
Yeah, okay, just one question. I am just need like a clarification. Are you saying, okay, like you mentioned that there should be a new president being elected? Is it like you should overhaul like ETA and the Spanish government, or those two should try to work together to
The issue
just a
with,
clarification, yeah.
the issue with the current conservative government is their lack of wanting to have talks with ETA.
Okay.
In the past, the past socialist president was at least willing to have some conversations
Okay.
with ETA.
What about the economic situation in Spain? Do you think that kind of prolongs the conflict? Does it prevent it from achieving positive peace, as you said?
It doesn't help
The Basque country is better off than most of Spain, so I think it has less of an impact than overall.
So you think that could fuel their independence gains, that maybe they feel like Spain is pulling them down economically?
I think that's part of it. I think Catalonia uses that argument.
Yeah, they
more.
do too, yeah.
It could definitely fuel their desire to break away. I still don't believe that the Spanish government will allow that to happen.
As you probably know, that there is this peace plan that was accepted by the Basque parliament recently. So it is like a unilateral move of the Basque government to take this peaceful path. But still, there is factions. Like there are certain factions in the Basque country, that they need to reconcile and accept to implement that peace plan.
That's why I suggested you bring those people to the table too, just so they can have a voice and feel like they're part of it.
So, in your opinion, what would be like the key obstacles in implementation of that plan, and what would be like the solutions? You don't have to mention everything, just one or two or something.
I think the realization that they're not going to ever become autonomous, I think that is an obstacle for the far left-wing people to.
You mean you never be accepted as a
a separate
country,
state.
a separate state,
Recognize it as a separate state, correct?
because they have a high degree of autonomy.
Yes.
As well as the Spanish government's refusal to speak with any of these groups is obviously a huge problem.
Any solutions to be like that you foresee? You mentioned
Mediation continued mediation as a track towards a solution.
Then, from what I know the situation, I also think in order to, move the peace process forward, just allow the Basque language be the official language in the Basque region, because now I believe it's a co-official language. Spanish is the official, so just allow the language to be the main language there.
Do you think that would help Elizabeth?
And I'll leave.
We disagree, but that's okay.
The language thing is a hard issue because so many non-Basque people are moving into the Basque country. Now only 60% of people in the Basque country are actually Basque or have a Basque parent. So it's becoming less Basque, you could say.
and the thing is that the Basque language almost was extinct, you can say, because it was forbidden during Franco's period. And they started to invest a lot in schools, education, and then there was, especially among young people, there is I think a high percentage of Basque speakers.
It's the old people and the young people know more Basque than the generation that lost.
During the Franco period. But now the Spanish immigrants are coming to Basque country because Basque country is so much more economically advanced and has more opportunities, employment opportunities for the people. So it's a very interesting situation. Okay, so any other comments?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you mentioned like education is important for change through the children, and actually not only you, but almost all the groups have mentioned that education is the right way education. So from last class, I was even thinking it's good, we should educate the children because, especially when they're young, that their minds are still open and whatnot, but So does that mean that we have to kind of totally, like, kind of put aside the older generation, just wait till they die off? Because we're always talking about the new generations, the young generations, which is a good thing. So is it that, does that mean there's no option for the ones who are living now in the generation now?
I think if you change the mentality of the younger generation, then the entire society could possibly start to shift the way that it also feels, because it will realize from these young eyes, maybe they're right. At least maybe that's the optimist in me, but I really think that from the ground up, it could possibly affect change.
My mom talks about when she was little, there used to be these commercials on TV that talked about how littering was really bad and they were targeting for children. And no one really, it wasn't in the consciousness, no one really thought about littering. And the kids then would tell their parents, this is bad, we can't do it. And it kind of started to change the culture. And so I think that with education, because a lot of times, I even remember coming home from school because, well, my teacher said this, and you tell your parents and you take it very seriously. And I think that in terms of kind of transforming the culture, school, well, yes, it doesn't target the adults, it does in an indirect way. Because the kids then come home and teach their families.
And I went through the same thing with using a seatbelt.
Yeah.
I'd get in the car and freak out if my parents didn't have their seatbelts on, because I would see crashes with,
The dummies.
Everybody in my family wears seatbelts.
That's true.
And this, as you say, littering and recycling, that was not part of the culture, of the parents and my parents and so on. But I mean, for you're this generation where recycling became really like a big thing, trend, and so we were teaching our parents to change their ways. So yeah, it can go both ways. Education can go both ways. Okay, so thank you very much. So who is next?